I should have known what was coming the moment I walked through those mahogany doors.
The sound hit me first, laughter, sharp and cutting, echoing through the marble foyer of my son's mansion. My grandson Tommy was turning 8, and I'd driven 3 hours through pouring rain just to be there for him. In my weathered hands, I clutched a small wrapped box containing a handmade wooden toy car I'd spent weeks carving in my tiny apartment. The moment I stepped into that opulent living room, the laughter died. Not the good kind of silence, the uncomfortable kind that makes your skin crawl.
My daughter? Sarah's eyes swept over my faded brown jacket and scuffed shoes like she was looking at something distasteful.
My son Marcus whispered something to his wife, and she covered her mouth, stifling a giggle. "Dad's here," Sarah announced to the room full of well-dressed guests, her voice carrying that particular tone reserved for unwelcome interruptions. The other parents, lawyers, doctors, business executives, turned to stare at me like I was some kind of curiosity. Tommy ran up to me, his face lighting up with genuine joy.
"Grandpa!"
"You came?" He threw his arms around my legs, and for a moment my heart soared. This was why I was here. This beautiful boy who still saw me as someone worth loving. "Happy birthday, champion," I whispered, ruffling his hair. "I brought you something special." But as I handed him the modest gift, I caught my son-in-law Richard's smirk. He was leaning against the marble fireplace, his Armani suit probably worth more than my monthly rent. "What's in the box, old man?"
"Another one of your
"Creative projects?" The room erupted in laughter again, and this time it felt like a physical blow. I watched Tommy's face as he unwrapped the wooden car, his eyes wide with wonder.
But his mother quickly snatched it away. "Oh, how—"
"Rustic," Sarah said, holding the toy like it might contaminate her manicured fingers. "Tommy has a whole collection of remote-controlled cars now, real ones."
"From Germany!" The humiliation burned in my chest as the guests chuckled among themselves.
I could hear the whispered comments. "Poor old man. Living in the past. Embarrassing."
Really? But what cut deepest wasn't their mockery. It was the way my own children stood there, saying nothing, letting it happen.
These people I'd sacrificed everything for, who now lived in mansions I could never afford, treating me like I was some charity case who'd wandered in from the street. Richard stepped forward, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Listen, Pops, maybe next time you should call first. This is a pretty exclusive gathering, you know. We've got important people here." The room fell silent again, waiting for my response. I felt every eye on me, measuring my reaction, waiting to see if the old man would finally crack. My hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the effort it took to keep my dignity intact. I looked at Tommy, who was still clutching my wooden car despite his mother's disapproval, and I made a decision that would change everything. "Of course," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I understand perfectly." But as I turned to leave, I caught sight of something that made me pause. Through the crowd of mockers and whispered insults, I noticed the hired entertainer in the corner, a clown in a colorful costume, setting up his equipment. He was watching me with an intensity that seemed out of place for a children's party performer. Our eyes met for just a moment, and something passed between us.
A recognition, a understanding.
The clown nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, and I felt a strange calm wash over me. I didn't know it then, but that brief exchange would be the first domino in a chain of events that would turn this day of humiliation into something none of them would ever forget. As I sat in my old Honda in the driveway, rain drumming against the windshield, the memories came flooding back like a dam had burst inside my head. How had it come to this? When did I become the family embarrassment, the burden they all wished would just disappear? I could still remember Marcus as a 5-year-old, climbing onto my lap in my cramped office above the small electronics shop I'd built from nothing. "Daddy, when I grow up, I want to be just like you," he'd said, his tiny fingers tracing the calluses on my hands. Those same hands that had worked 18-hour days, that had bled building the business that would eventually make my children millionaires. Sarah used to beg me to read her bedtime stories. Even when I was so exhausted I could barely keep my eyes open. "One more, Daddy, please." And I'd always give in because her smile was worth more than sleep. Now that same smile had turned cold, calculating, measuring my worth by the label on my jacket and the age of my shoes. The irony was suffocating. The mansion they were celebrating in? I'd taught Marcus the electrical work that landed him his first big construction contract.
Sarah's law practice?
I'd worked double shifts to pay for her Harvard education, living on instant noodles and coffee for months at a time. Richard's smugness about his important friends. He'd married into a family I'd built with my own sweat and sacrifice, but somewhere along the way, success had changed them. The more money they made, the more they seemed to forget where it all started. The small apartment where we'd celebrated every birthday with homemade cake became a source of shame. The second-hand clothes we'd worn with pride became symbols of failure. And I, the man who'd given them everything, became a reminder of a past they wanted to erase. The loneliness was the worst part. Sitting in my small apartment every evening, watching game shows and eating microwave dinners, wondering when my own children would call. The phone that rarely rang. The holidays spent alone while they vacationed in Europe or the Caribbean, always too busy for the old man who'd made their lifestyle possible. I'd tried to reach out. God knows I'd tried. Birthday cards with checks I couldn't really afford.
Offers to babysit Tommy so they could have date nights.
Invitations to simple dinners that were always declined with polite excuses. "We're so busy, Dad." "Maybe next time." You understand. But I did understand. I understood that I'd become an inconvenience, a living reminder of humble beginnings they'd rather forget. In their world of charity galas and country clubs, I was the embarrassing father who showed up in outdated clothes.
And talked about the good old days. What?
They didn't understand. What they'd never bothered to ask was what I'd been doing with my time since they'd
Pushed me out of their lives.
They assumed I was just another lonely old man waiting to die. They had no idea about the small workshop in my garage, the new business I'd been quietly building. They had no clue about the phone calls I'd been taking, the meetings I'd been attending, the plans I'd been making as I sat there in the rain. Watching through the window as they continued their party without me, I felt something shift inside my chest.
Not anger. That would have been too simple.
It was something colder, more calculating. A clarity that comes when you finally stop hoping for things to change and start making them change. My phone buzzed. A text message. I glanced at the screen and smiled for the first time all day. "Everything is ready, Mr. Khan. The show is about to begin."
JP, my business partner, my friend.
The one person in this world who still called me Sir and meant it. I looked back toward the house where the sounds of the party were growing louder, and I made a decision. I wasn't leaving. Not yet. This birthday party was far from over. The front door opened with a flourish just as I was contemplating whether to drive away or stay to witness what was about to unfold. A figure in a vibrant red and blue costume bounded through the entrance, juggling colorful balls with professional precision. The clown I'd noticed earlier had officially arrived to begin his performance, and something about his presence immediately commanded attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls!" His voice boomed through the mansion's grand foyer, rich and theatrical. The amazing, the spectacular, the one and only. Jolly Pete is here to make this birthday party absolutely unforgettable. The guests turned toward the entertainer with polite applause, but I noticed something the others missed. The way he moved wasn't quite right for a typical children's party clown. His posture was too confident, his gestures too refined. This wasn't some struggling performer working weekend parties for grocery money. This was someone playing a role and playing it very, very well. "Now where's our birthday boy?" Jolly Pete called out, his painted smile somehow managing to convey genuine warmth despite the theatrical makeup. Tommy stepped forward shyly, still clutching my wooden car, and the clown dropped to one knee with a dramatic flourish. "Well, hello there, young sir. 8 years old today, I hear."
My, what a milestone.
He reached into his oversized pocket and produced a balloon, which he began twisting into an intricate shape. 8 is a very special number. It's the number of sides in an octagon, the number of legs on a spider.
And he glanced around the room meaningfully.
The number of people who will remember this party for the rest of their lives. The adults chuckled politely, but I caught the subtle weight behind his words. This wasn't random party patter. There was intention behind every syllable. As Jolly Pete continued his balloon artistry, his eyes swept the room, taking in every detail. The crystal chandelier, the Italian marble floors, the designer furniture, and the conspicuous absence of family photos that included me. When his gaze finally landed on me, still standing awkwardly near the entrance, his entire demeanor shifted. "And who do we have here?" he asked, his voice carrying a tone of respect that was completely at odds with how I'd been treated since arriving. He stood and approached me with a slight bow.
"So you must be family."
"I can see the resemblance in your eyes." The room fell silent. Richard's smirk faltered. Sarah's face tightened with embarrassment.
Here was this performer, this hired help, treating me with more dignity in 10 seconds than my own family had shown me all afternoon. "That's just my father," Marcus said quickly, his voice sharp with warning. "Dad, you don't need to—" "Your father,"
Jolly Pete interrupted, his painted eyebrows rising dramatically.
"the patriarch."
"The foundation of this beautiful family." He gestured grandly toward me. "Sir, it's an honor to meet you. Truly." I felt tears prick at the eyes I'd kept dry through all the earlier humiliation. When was the last time someone had looked at me like I mattered? When had anyone besides Tommy shown me this basic human respect?
"Thank you," I managed to say, my voice rough with emotion. "No, sir."
"Thank you." The clown's response was quiet, meant only for me to hear, but something in his tone made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. There was recognition there, familiarity, as if we'd met before, though I was certain we hadn't. The performance that followed was masterful. Jolly Pete worked the room like a seasoned professional, but I noticed how he managed to weave subtle commentary into his act. When he made jokes about people who forget where they come from, his eyes would dart toward my children. When he performed a magic trick about things that appear worthless but are actually priceless, he gestured toward my wooden car in Tommy's hands. The guests laughed and applauded, completely missing the subtext. But my children were starting to look uncomfortable. They could sense something was off, even if they couldn't put their finger on what. "You know," Jolly Pete said during a brief pause in his routine, "I once knew a man who built an empire with his bare hands. Started with nothing but determination and love for his family. People called him crazy, said he'd never amount to anything. But he proved them all wrong." He was looking directly at me now.
And I felt my heart begin to race. "The funny thing about empires," he continued,
his voice taking on a storyteller's cadence, "is that they can be built more than once. Sometimes the second time around, they're even stronger than the first." Richard cleared his throat loudly. "Maybe we should move on to the magic tricks. The kids are getting restless," but Jolly Pete wasn't finished. He reached into his bag and pulled out a deck of cards, fanning them expertly.
"Magic tricks? Oh, sir, I've got the perfect one."
"It's called the Invisible Crown. Would you like to see it?" Nobody answered, but he continued anyway. "You see, sometimes a king walks among us, and we're so busy looking for the crown that we forget to recognize royalty when it's standing right in front of us." The tension in the room was palpable now. My children exchanged worried glances. The guests shifted uncomfortably. But I remained perfectly still, watching this mysterious performer with growing fascination. Who was this man? And why did I have the strangest feeling that I was about to find out? The performance continued, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted like weather before a storm. Jolly Pete's magic tricks became increasingly pointed, each one seemingly designed to make the adults squirm while delighting the children who remained blissfully unaware of the undercurrents. For my next trick,
"I need a volunteer," the clown announced, scanning the room theatrically.
someone who thinks they're very important, Someone who believes they've earned everything they have all by themselves. Richard stepped forward with his characteristic arrogance. "I'll do it," he said, straightening his expensive tie.
Though I should warn you, I'm not easily fooled. Oh, I'm counting on that, sir, Jolly Pete replied with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes behind the makeup.
This trick is called the Emperor's New Success. Please, step right here. As Richard positioned himself center stage, I noticed the clown's assistant, a young woman I hadn't seen arrive, wheeling in a large mirror on an ornate stand. The reflection caught the light from the chandelier, casting rainbow patterns across the walls. Now, Mr. Jolly Pete paused expectantly. "Richardson," Richard replied proudly. "Richard Richardson."
I'm a senior partner at Richardson, Blake & Associates. Ah, yes, the famous Richardson, the clown nodded sagely. Tell me, how did you build your empire?
"What was your first big break?" Richard puffed up like a peacock. "Well, it was actually my father-in-law who helped me get started. He taught me some electrical work that landed me my first major contract. But of course, I took that small opportunity and built something much bigger through my own hard work and vision." The irony wasn't lost on me. He was literally describing my contribution to his success while simultaneously taking credit for it. But what happened next left me speechless. Jolly Pete nodded thoughtfully, then reached into his pocket and pulled out what appeared to be a simple business card. Fascinating. And this first contract, would it happen to have been with Khan Construction Services? The colour drained from Richard's face. Sarah's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. Marcus took a step backward as if he'd been slapped. "How did you—" Richard began. But the clown held up a gloved hand. "The mirror doesn't lie. Mr. Richardson, look closely." Jolly Pete gestured toward the ornate mirror. And somehow, though I still don't understand how he managed it, Richard's reflection began to shimmer and change. Images appeared in the glass. A younger Richard in work clothes, learning electrical wiring from a patient older man in a small, cluttered workshop. The guests gasped and murmured among themselves. Some pulled out their phones, thinking it was some kind of high-tech illusion. But I recognized every detail in that reflection. It was my old workshop, the one behind the electronics store. The same place where I'd taught my son-in-law everything he knew about the trade that had made him rich. "The mirror shows us the truth," Jolly Pete announced to the mesmerized crowd. "It reveals the foundations upon which our success is truly built. Mr. Richardson, do you recognize the man teaching you in this reflection?" Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The guests were recording everything now, their phones capturing his humiliation for posterity. In the background, I could hear Sarah whispering frantically to Marcus, trying to figure out how to control the situation. But it was too late for damage control. The truth was literally reflecting back at them, and everyone in that room could see it. That's
not relevant, Richard finally stammered.
That was years ago.
I've built my own success since then, have you?
Jolly Pete asked gently, almost kindly. The mirror seems to suggest otherwise. The reflection shifted again, showing Richard's business dealings over the years. Contracts signed using techniques I'd taught him. Clients impressed by knowledge I'd shared. Success built on a foundation I'd laid, brick by brick, in that humble workshop they were all so eager to forget. "This is ridiculous," Sarah burst out, her composure finally cracking. "This is just some elaborate trick."
"Dad, tell them this is nonsense."
All eyes turned to me. The family members who'd been treating me like an embarrassment. The guests who'd been whispering about the poor old man in outdated clothes. The children who'd inherited everything I'd built, but forgotten where it came from. I could have ended it right there. I could have played along, protected their dignity, saved them from their own arrogance. The old me might have done exactly that, but the old me had died somewhere between their laughter and their sneers. The man standing in that doorway had been forged by years of loneliness and disrespect, tempered by the quiet strength that comes from building something from nothing. Not once, but twice. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence.
I think the mirror is working perfectly. Jolly Pete turned toward me.
And for the first time since he'd arrived, he removed his colourful hat. Beneath it, I could see silver hair and familiar eyes, eyes that had looked at me with respect and admiration for years. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice dropping the theatrical tone, "allow me to properly introduce myself. My name is James Peterson."
But most people call me JP the business card.
The texts, the plans that had been months in the making, it all came together in a moment of perfect crystalline clarity. My business partner had come to the party, and the real show was just beginning. As JP stood there, his clown makeup somehow making his words more powerful rather than less, I felt the weight of the past crash over me like a tide. The room seemed to fade away, and I was transported back to the worst day of my life, the day my own children betrayed me. It had been a Tuesday in March 3 years ago. I remember because Tuesdays were always our family business meetings, held in the conference room of Khan Electronics, the company I'd built from a single repair shop into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. For 30 years, every Tuesday at 3 p.m., we gathered to discuss sales figures, expansion plans, and the future of our family legacy. I'd walked into that conference room expecting another routine meeting.
Instead, I found lawyers. "Dad, sit down," Marcus had said, but his voice lacked its usual warmth.
Sarah wouldn't even meet my eyes, instead shuffling through legal documents spread across the mahogany table I'd bought to celebrate our first $1 million year. "What's this about?" I'd asked, but even as the words left my mouth, I could feel the trap closing around me. Richard cleared his throat. He'd always been the spokesperson when dirty work needed doing. "We've been talking, Pops, and we think it's time for you to step back.
"Enjoy your retirement."
You've earned it." The word retirement hit me like a physical blow. At 62, I was in the best health of my life, sharper than I'd ever been, with more ideas and energy than all of them combined. Retirement wasn't something I'd ever discussed or wanted. "I'm not ready to retire," I'd said simply. That's when Sarah finally looked up, her lawyer's training evident in the cold calculation behind her eyes. "Dad, you don't really have a choice. We've reviewed the corporate structure and, well, we have controlling interest." The betrayal was surgical in its precision. Over the years, I'd gradually transferred shares to my children, wanting them to feel invested in the business, wanting to ensure their financial security. Small percentages here and there, birthday gifts and Christmas presents, rewards for good grades and life milestones. Each transfer had felt like an act of love. I'd never done the math, never realized that my generosity had handed them the keys to my own kingdom. "We're not throwing you out," Marcus had added quickly, seeing the devastation on my face. "You'll get a generous retirement package, a pension, and of course, you'll always be Dad." But the numbers they showed me told a different story. The generous package would barely cover the rent on a modest apartment. The pension was calculated using some convoluted formula that somehow minimized my decades of contribution. They were offering me just enough to survive, but not enough to compete. "What about the electronics division?"
I'd asked desperately.
"The repair shop? That was my baby from the beginning. We're closing it," Sarah had said matter-of-factly.
"It's not profitable anymore."
"People don't repair things these days, Dad. They replace them." "The repair shop?" The place where I'd taught Marcus his first lessons about business, where Sarah had done her homework while I worked late into the night, where I'd met customers who became friends, friends who became family. They were going to shut it down like it meant nothing. "You can't do this," I'd whispered. But even as I said it, I knew they could. The lawyer's presence made that abundantly clear. "We already have," Richard had replied with that same smug tone I'd heard at Tommy's party. "The paperwork is already filed. You're officially retired as of today." I'd sat in that conference room, my conference room, in my building, surrounded by awards and photos chronicling 30 years of my life, and watched my children strip away everything I'd built. They'd even thought to change the locks on my office before the meeting, as if I might steal from my own company. The months that followed were the darkest of my life, moving from my comfortable house to a cramped apartment, watching helplessly as they dismantled the repair division and laid off employees who'd been with me for decades, seeing my life's work reduced to profit margins and tax write-offs. But the worst part was how quickly they wrote me out of the story. Within 6 months, Khan Electronics had become Richardson and Associates. Within a year, they were telling people they'd built the company from scratch, conveniently forgetting the 30 years of groundwork that had made their success possible. That's when I'd started planning. Not revenge, I'd never been a vengeful man, but justice. There's a difference. While they were busy spending their inherited wealth and networking at country clubs, I was quietly building something new. A small entertainment company started with the modest savings they'd left me. I called it Milestone Productions, and I began with a single principle: treat people with dignity and respect. Regardless of their position or appearance, JP had
been my first hire, a struggling performer with a master's
degree in business who'd been blacklisted by the major entertainment agencies for refusing to compromise his principles. Together we'd built something beautiful, a company that specialized in children's entertainment, corporate events, and special occasions. But more than that, we'd built a philosophy. Every person deserves respect.
and every story deserves to be told. Now, standing in this mansion that my sacrifices had paid for,
Watching my business partner reveal himself to the people who'd betrayed me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years: pride. Not in what I'd lost, but in what I'd built since. Not in the past they'd stolen, but in the future I'd created without them. The flashback ended as JP's voice brought me back to the present. "Mr. Khan," he said, bowing slightly toward me, "would you like to tell them about Milestone Productions?" The silence that followed JP's question was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor, if not for the sound of Sarah's sharp intake of breath and Richard's strangled cough. The guests stood frozen like wax figures, their phones still recording, capturing every second of what was about to unfold. Milestone Productions? Marcus repeated the name slowly, as if testing how it felt on his tongue.
"Dad, what is he talking about?"
I stepped forward, my worn shoes clicking against the marble with a sound that seemed to echo through the sudden stillness. For the first time in 3 years, I felt the weight of command settling back onto my shoulders, the feeling of being in control of my own story. "JP," I said, my voice steady and clear, "why don't you tell them what Milestone Productions is?" My business partner reached into his colorful costume and pulled out what appeared to be a simple tablet. But as he powered it on, the device projected a holographic display that filled the center of the room. Numbers, charts, and company logos appeared in mid-air, rotating slowly for everyone to see. "Milestone Productions," JP announced, his voice taking on the cadence of a corporate presentation, "is a full-service entertainment and event management company, specializing in high-end corporate functions, celebrity parties, and exclusive children's entertainment. We were founded 3 years ago with an initial investment
Of $50,000.
Hologram showed the company's growth trajectory, a steep upward curve that made even the business-minded adults in the room lean forward with
Interest. Today, JP continued,
Milestone Productions has annual revenues of $12 million. We employ over 200 performers, coordinate events for Fortune 500 companies, and have exclusive contracts with 3 major hotel chains. Richard's face had gone white.
That's impossible.
You can't build a company that successful in 3 years. You're right, JP replied with a smile. Most people can't, but most people don't have Mr. Amjad Khan as their founder and CEO. The hologram shifted, showing photos of elegant corporate events, celebrity birthday parties, and elaborate wedding receptions. In every image there was JP, sometimes as a clown, sometimes as a magician, sometimes in a business suit, but always with the same professional excellence that had made him one of the most sought-after entertainers on the East Coast. You see, I said, finally finding my voice. When you stripped away everything I'd built, you forgot one crucial detail. You took my company, but you couldn't take my knowledge. You inherited my success, but you couldn't inherit my ability to create it. Sarah was staring at the holographic display like it might bite her. This is some kind of trick. Some kind of elaborate hoax, is it? JP asked mildly. He reached into another pocket and produced his phone. Not a performer's prop, but a sleek business device. Perhaps you'd like to call the Ritz-Carlton downtown. Ask them about the Peterson and Kahn corporate event they're hosting next week. Or maybe check with the mayor's office about the children's charity gala we're organizing for next month. The names hit the room like hammer blows. The Ritz-Carlton, the mayor's office. These weren't small-time venues or local politicians. These were the kinds of clients that Sarah and Marcus had always bragged about landing for their own businesses. Peterson and Kahn,
Marcus whispered. You two are partners? More than partners, JP said warmly.
Mr. Kahn saved my career when the big agencies blacklisted me for refusing to compromise my principles.
He gave me a chance when no one else would.
He taught me that success isn't just about making money, it's about building something that matters. I watched my children's faces as the reality sank in. Their elderly father, the man they'd pushed into retirement, the embarrassment they'd hidden from their friends. He hadn't been sitting in his apartment feeling sorry for himself. He'd been building an empire, the wooden car. Tommy's small voice cut through the adult tension. He was still holding my handmade gift, turning it over in his small hands. Grandpa, did you make this? I knelt down to his level, grateful for the interruption.
I did, champion. In my workshop. Do you make toys for other kids too?
The innocence of the question broke my heart and filled it at the same time. Sometimes, when they deserve them. JP knelt down beside me, his colourful costume somehow not seeming ridiculous anymore. Your grandfather makes the most beautiful toys I've ever seen, Tommy. We have them in all of our luxury children's parties. Rich families pay thousands of dollars for handmade wooden toys just like that one. Thousands? Richard croaked. Oh yes, JP replied casually.
Artisanal children's toys are quite popular among the wealthy these days.
Especially when they're made by someone with Mr. Kahn's reputation for craftsmanship. The hologram shifted again, showing photos of elegant playrooms and nurseries, each one featuring beautiful wooden toys that looked remarkably similar to the one Tommy was holding. Price tags appeared next to each item. $500 for a wooden train, $800 for a handcrafted dollhouse, and $200 for a custom rocking horse. But this isn't about money, I said, standing back up and looking directly at my children. This was never about money. Then what is it about? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked around the room at the expensive decorations, the designer clothes, the carefully curated perfection that had replaced the warmth I remembered from their childhood, at the guests who were still recording, still waiting to see how this drama would unfold. It's about respect, I said simply. It's about remembering where you came from. It's about understanding that success isn't something you're entitled to. It's something you earn. Every single day, JP stood up beside me, and in that moment,
I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen in my children's faces for years. Pride.
Not in what I owned or what I'd accomplished, but in who I was as a person. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced to the room, his voice carrying the authority of someone who commanded respect in boardrooms and ballrooms across the country. Allow me to properly introduce my business partner, my mentor, and my friend, Mr. Amjad Khan, founder and CEO of Milestone Productions, master craftsman, and the man who taught me that true success is measured not by what you take, but by what you give. The applause that followed was unlike anything I'd heard at this party. It wasn't polite or obligatory. It was genuine, filled with the kind of admiration that comes from witnessing something remarkable. But the sound I heard most clearly was Tommy's voice, cutting through the applause with perfect 8-year-old clarity. "Grandpa, you're famous!" The applause died down, but the energy in the room had completely transformed. Where there had been casual dismissal and barely concealed contempt, now there was electric attention. Every guest was focused on me with the kind of sharp interest usually reserved for celebrity encounters or business networking opportunities. But my attention was fixed on my children. Marcus was staring at the holographic display like he was trying to solve a complex equation. Sarah had that particular expression she'd worn as a child when caught in a lie, defiant but scared.
And Richard looked like he might be sick. This doesn't make sense, Marcus said finally.
Dad, if you had this kind of success, why didn't you tell us?
Why the... He gestured at my simple clothes, the act.
The question hung in the air like smoke. JP looked at me questioningly, giving me the choice of how much to reveal. I appreciated his discretion, but the time for half-truths was over, because I wanted to see who you really were, I said simply. I wanted to know if my children would treat me with basic human dignity when they thought I had nothing to offer them. That's not fair, Sarah protested. You can't test people like that. You can't judge us based on how you treat your father, I interrupted. On whether you show respect to the man who sacrificed everything to give you the foundation for your success. The hologram shifted again, and this time it showed something that made several guests gasp. Financial records clearly displayed the costs of Marcus's engineering degree, Sarah's law school tuition, the seed money for Richard's first business venture. Numbers that added into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Every dollar of your education, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion churning inside me.
Every opportunity I created for you.
Every connection I made to help launch your careers. All of it documented, all of it freely given, because that's what fathers do for their children. We never asked you to, Richard began, but JP held up a hand. Actually, Mr. Richardson, you did, repeatedly. JP touched the tablet, and the hologram displayed what appeared to be old letters and emails. These are copies of correspondence spanning 15 years, requests for loans, for business advice, for connections with suppliers and contractors, all of them asking Mr. Khan for help, all of them promising gratitude and respect in return. The guests were reading the projected emails now, their expressions shifting from curiosity to uncomfortable recognition. These weren't just family financial matters, they were the kind of manipulative communications that everyone recognized, but nobody wanted to acknowledge. Dad, please, Marcus said, and for the first time all day, his voice carried genuine emotion.
You're humiliating us in front of everyone. No, I replied, my voice growing stronger.
You humiliated yourselves. I'm just providing context. I walked to the center of the room, standing directly beneath the holographic display.
Do you want to know what really broke my heart?
It wasn't losing the company. It wasn't being forced into retirement. It wasn't even watching you close down the repair shop where I'd spent the best years of my life. The room was absolutely silent now. Even Tommy had stopped playing with his wooden car, sensing the gravity of the moment. What broke my heart was the day I called to tell you about my new business, and Marcus hung up on me because he was too busy to listen to his father's dreams. It was watching Sarah turn away from me at the grocery store because she was embarrassed to be seen with me in front of her law firm colleagues. It was having Richard tell people at parties that I was getting senile when I tried to contribute to conversations about business. Each revelation landed like a physical blow. I could see my children remembering these moments, perhaps seeing them clearly for the first time. But mostly, I continued, it was watching my grandson grow up without knowing who his grandfather really was. Seeing him apologize for my gifts because his parents had taught him to be ashamed of anything that wasn't expensive. Tommy looked up at me with wide eyes, then at his parents, then back at me. His 8-year-old mind was processing something that was shifting his entire understanding of his family dynamics. The wooden car isn't cheap, he said suddenly. It's special. You made it just for me. That's right, champion, I said, kneeling down to his level again. Every curve, every wheel, every detail.
I made it with love, and that makes it priceless. When I stood up, I faced my children directly. I didn't come here today to embarrass you.
I came here because it's my grandson's birthday and I wanted to celebrate with my family. But you made it clear that I wasn't welcome. Dad, we never said, Sarah began. You didn't have to say it, I interrupted. The laughter said it. The whispers said it. The way you snatched away Tommy's gift like it was contaminated said it louder than words ever could. JP stepped forward, his presence somehow both theatrical and dignified. Mr. Khan, should I show them the rest? I looked at him questioningly. The rest? He smiled, a real smile, not the painted clown expression. The charitable foundation, the scholarship program, the community center renovations, the children's hospital wing. The hologram exploded with new information. Photos of ribbon-cutting ceremonies, newspaper articles, thank you letters from families whose children had received scholarships.
And in every image there I was, not as a forgotten old man,
but as a respected community leader and philanthropist. Milestone Productions, JP explained to the stunned room, donates 30% of its profits to educational and community programs. Mr. Khan has personally funded 17 full scholarships to state universities for underprivileged students. He's also the anonymous donor who renovated the children's wing at St. Mary's Hospital. The revelation hit the room like a thunderclap. Several guests were now looking at me with something approaching awe. The embarrassing father they'd been pitying was actually one of the city's most generous philanthropists. Anonymous? Marcus whispered. Of course anonymous, I replied. When you do something because it's right, you don't need credit for it. I looked around the room one more time, taking in the faces of people who had completely reassessed their opinion of me in the span of 20 minutes. Then I focused on my children, my successful, arrogant, beautiful children who suddenly looked very small and very young. I forgive you, I said simply. All of you. Because that's what fathers do. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting.
and it doesn't mean accepting disrespect. I turned toward the door, then paused. JP, I think it's time for the final reveal.
JP nodded solemnly and touched his tablet one final time. The holographic display shifted to show something that made the air in the room feel suddenly thin. A comprehensive timeline of my children's business dealings since they'd taken over Khan Electronics. Ladies and gentlemen, JP announced, his voice taking on the clinical tone of an investigative journalist, what you're about to see is a matter of public record. We've simply compiled it into a coherent narrative. The display showed the company's performance over the past 3 years. The numbers were devastating. Revenue down 40%, customer complaints up by 200%. Key contracts lost to competitors who offered better service and more reliable workmanship. No, Sarah whispered, reaching toward the hologram as if she could somehow stop it. You can't show that.
That's private business information. Actually, Ms. Richardson now, isn't it?
All of this information is available through public business filings, JP replied matter-of-factly. We've simply organized it in a more accessible format. The timeline continued, showing the systematic dismantling of everything I'd built. The repair division, my pride and joy, hadn't just been closed. It had been sold to a competitor for a fraction of its value. The customer service department I'd insisted on maintaining had been outsourced to a call center in another state. The community outreach programs I'd established had been eliminated entirely. We had to streamline operations, Marcus said desperately.
That's just good business practice, is it?
JP asked mildly. The display shifted to show comparative data from similar companies in the region. Because your competitors seem to be thriving with the traditional full-service model that your father pioneered. The guests were studying the projections with the intensity of investors reviewing a prospectus. Several were taking notes on their phones, not for social media, but for their own business intelligence. The Richardson name, which had been synonymous with success and reliability, was being systematically dismantled in real time. But perhaps the most interesting part, JP continued, is what happened to the employees who were let go when Khan Electronics was restructured. The hologram showed a new set of data: employment records, business licenses, success stories. Former Khan Electronics employees who had started their own companies, joined competitors, or been recruited by firms that valued their experience and training. It turns out, JP said with a slight smile, that people trained by Mr. Khan were highly sought after in the industry. 67% of former Khan Electronics employees found better paying positions within 6 months of being laid off. Many of them cite the work ethic and problem-solving skills they learned from Mr. Khan as key factors in their success. I felt a warmth spread through my chest.
Even in my defeat, even in the betrayal and humiliation, the people I'd mentored had thrived.
The values I'd taught had endured. Several of these former employees, JP continued, now work for companies that are direct competitors to Richardson and Associates. They've been instrumental in winning contracts that were previously guaranteed renewals for your family business. Richard's face had gone from pale to green. Are you saying that Dad's former employees are deliberately sabotaging our business? Not at all, JP replied cheerfully. They're simply doing what Mr. Khan taught them to do, providing excellent service at fair prices while treating customers with respect and dignity. Apparently, the market rewards that approach. The hologram shifted again, showing recent news articles and business journal entries. Richardson and Associates was mentioned in several, not for success stories, but for customer service failures, missed deadlines, and quality control issues. The irony, JP observed, is that in trying to modernize and streamline the business, you eliminated the very elements that made it successful in the first place. The personal touch, the commitment to excellence, the understanding that reputation is built one satisfied customer at a time. One of the guests, a woman I didn't recognize, stepped forward. "Excuse me, but are you saying that Richardson and Associates is in financial trouble?" The question hung in the air like a sword. Sarah and Marcus exchanged panicked glances, while Richard looked like he might actually faint. "I'm not saying anything," JP replied, diplomatically. "I'm simply presenting publicly available information and allowing people to draw their own conclusions." But the conclusion was obvious to everyone in the room. The successful business empire my children had inherited was crumbling, while the washed-up old man they'd discarded had built something new and thriving. Tommy, who had been following the adult conversation with the intense focus that 8-year-olds sometimes display, suddenly spoke up. "Does this mean Grandpa's rich and Mommy and Daddy are poor?" The innocent question hit the room like a thunderbolt. Several guests actually laughed, not mockingly, but with the surprised appreciation of someone witnessing perfect comic timing. "It means, champion," I said gently, kneeling down to Tommy's level again, "that money isn't the most important thing. What matters is how you treat people, how hard you work, and whether you remember to be grateful for what you have." "But are you rich, Grandpa?" I looked up at the holographic display showing Milestone Productions' success, the charitable foundation's impact, the respect I'd earned in my new life. Then I looked at my children's faces, the embarrassment, the fear, the dawning realization of what they'd lost. "I'm rich in the things that matter. Tommy, I have work that I love, people who respect me."
And I looked directly at him. A grandson who still thinks his grandfather's handmade gifts are special. Tommy beamed and hugged the wooden car closer to his chest. Around us,
the party guests were beginning to whisper among themselves. I could hear fragments of conversation. Had no idea. Always seemed like such a sweet old man. We're going to have to reconsider that contract with Richardson. The social destruction was as thorough as it was swift. In the space of 30 minutes, my children had gone from successful business owners to subjects of pitying gossip. Their reputation, the currency they'd valued above family loyalty, was evaporating before their eyes. "Dad," Marcus said quietly, his voice breaking slightly. We didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I corrected gently. "There's a difference." And in that moment, watching my children confront the consequences of their choices, I felt something I hadn't expected: sadness.
Not satisfaction or vindication, but genuine grief for the family we'd once been and the relationships that might have been. The final reveal was complete.
The truth was out. But somehow, victory didn't feel quite like I'd thought it would. The aftermath of revelation settled over the room like dust after an explosion. Conversations had resumed, but they were hushed, urgent exchanges as guests processed what they'd witnessed and recalculated their social and business relationships accordingly. Several people had already approached me quietly, introducing themselves properly and expressing interest in Milestone Productions' services. But my attention remained focused on my family, who stood in a small, isolated cluster near the elaborate birthday decorations that now seemed almost obscenely festive given the gravity of what had unfolded. JP had begun quietly packing up his equipment, transitioning back from dramatic reveal to professional entertainer. The holographic display had been replaced by simple balloon animals and magic tricks for the children who remained, though most of the adults seemed too distracted to pay attention to the resumed performance. "Ladies and gentlemen," JP announced, his voice cutting through the murmured conversations. "Before we conclude today's very special birthday celebration, I believe our host Mr. Khan would like to share a few words." All eyes turned to me. My children looked terrified, probably wondering what final humiliation I might have in store. The guests looked expectant, hungry for more drama. And Tommy looked up at me with the perfect trust that only children can offer. I walked to the center of the room, standing where the holographic display had been, and took a deep breath. 35 years ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. I started with nothing but a set of tools and a dream.
I wanted to build something that would last.
Something I could pass on to my children. Something that would make a difference in people's lives. I looked around the room, taking in faces that ranged from curious to judgmental to sympathetic. I succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. I built a company that employed dozens of people, served thousands of customers, and provided my family with opportunities I could never have imagined as a young immigrant working in a factory. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, but I continued. But somewhere along the way I made a mistake. I confused giving my children everything with teaching them to value everything. I thought that by removing obstacles from their path, I was showing them love. Instead, I was robbing them of the chance to develop their own strength. The room was absolutely still now. Even Tommy had stopped playing with his wooden car, sensing the importance of the moment. When they took my company from me, I was devastated. Not because of the money or the prestige, but because I felt like I'd failed as a father.
How could children I'd loved so completely treat me with such disregard?
I could see tears forming in Marcus's eyes, and Sarah was gripping Richard's arm so tightly her knuckles were white. It took me a long time to understand that their actions weren't a reflection of my failure as a father. They were a consequence of my success as a provider.
I'd given them so much that they'd never learned to appreciate anything. JP approached quietly, carrying a crystal champagne flute filled with what appeared to be sparkling cider.
He offered it to me with a slight bow, then stepped back. "So I want to propose a toast," I said, raising the glass. "Not to success or failure, not to revenge or vindication, but to second chances." The guests raised their own glasses, some filled with champagne, others with soft drinks or water. But everyone participated in the ritual. I got a second chance to build something meaningful. JP got a second chance to pursue his dreams. The employees who lost their jobs got second chances with new companies that valued their skills. I looked directly at my children. And now you have a second chance too. A chance to remember what really matters. A chance to choose relationships over reputation, family over financial gain, gratitude over greed. The silence stretched out like a held breath. I won't pretend that what happened here today doesn't change anything. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. Respect, once lost, must be earned back through actions, not words. Richard stepped forward, his face flushed with shame and something that might have been hope.
Mr. Khan, Dad,
What can we do to... I held up my hand gently. That's not for me to tell you, Richard. That's for you to figure out. But I will say this. It starts with understanding that success isn't something you inherit. It's something you earn every single day through the choices you make and the way you treat people. I turned to address the room more broadly. To everyone here, thank you for witnessing this family moment.
I know it was uncomfortable and I appreciate your patience.
But sometimes truth needs an audience to have power. Several guests nodded, and I could see in their faces that they understood they'd witnessed something significant, not just a personal drama, but a lesson about values and consequences that extended far beyond our family. And to JP, I raised my glass toward my business partner. Thank you for reminding me that dignity isn't something that can be taken away. It's something you choose to maintain regardless of how others treat you. JP bowed again, his painted smile somehow conveying genuine warmth and respect. So here's to second chances, I said, raising my glass higher. To the courage to rebuild, the wisdom to learn from our mistakes, and the strength to forgive both others and ourselves. To second chances, the room echoed, and the sound of clinking glasses filled the air. But the sound I heard most clearly was Tommy's small voice, cutting through the formal toast with perfect 8-year-old directness. Grandpa, does this mean you're coming to Christmas dinner? The question hung in the air for a moment, and then something beautiful happened. Marcus laughed, not a bitter or uncomfortable laugh, but the genuine sound of joy breaking through pain. Sarah smiled through her tears. Even Richard managed a weak grin. That depends, champion, I said, looking at his parents. Am I invited?
Yes, Sarah said immediately, her voice thick with emotion.
Yes, Dad, you're always invited.
We
forgot how to ask. And in that moment, standing in that opulent room, surrounded by the debris of pride and the possibility of redemption, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years, hope. The party would end soon. The guests would leave with stories to tell and lessons to process. JP would pack up his equipment and return to our business, which would continue to thrive and grow. But the real work, the hard, patient work of rebuilding a family, was just beginning. The party began to wind down as the afternoon light softened to golden evening hues streaming through the mansion's tall windows. Guests departed in small groups, many stopping to shake my hand and express their admiration, not just for Milestone Productions, but for the dignity I'd maintained throughout the confrontation. Several business cards were exchanged, along with promises to stay in touch that felt more genuine than the usual social pleasantries. P. had finished packing his equipment with the efficient professionalism that had made him such a valuable partner. As he prepared to leave, he approached me with something I hadn't seen before, a beautifully wrapped gift box with Tommy's name on it. From both of us, he said quietly, handing me the box, a proper birthday present from Milestone Productions. Inside was a handcrafted wooden train set, not the simple toy I'd made in my small workshop, but an elaborate creation with multiple cars, detailed painting, and tracks that could be assembled into dozens of different configurations. It was the kind of artisanal toy that would retail for thousands of dollars in the exclusive boutiques that catered to wealthy families. It's beautiful, Sarah whispered, running her fingers over the smooth wood.
Dad, this is
incredible workmanship. Tommy, I called to my grandson, who was showing his wooden car to the few remaining children. Come here, champion. I have something else for you. His eyes widened as he saw the train set, but instead of grabbing for it immediately like most children would, he looked up at me with a question in his eyes. Is this one special too, Grandpa? Like my car? Every gift is special when it's made with love, I told him. But this one comes with something extra. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope I'd been carrying all day. This is the real gift, Tommy. The train is just the wrapping. Tommy opened the envelope with the careful precision of a child who'd been taught to be respectful of important documents. Inside was a letter written in my careful handwriting, along with several official-looking papers. What does it say, Grandpa? I can read some words, but the big ones are hard. I knelt down to his level and helped him unfold the letter. It says that when you turn 18, you'll have money set aside for college. But more importantly, it says that your grandfather believes in you. The trust fund I'd established was substantial, enough to cover not just Tommy's education, but graduate school if he chose, or seed money for starting his own business. But the letter was more valuable than any financial instrument. Dear Tommy, I read aloud, by the time you read this, you'll be old enough to understand that families sometimes make mistakes. Adults sometimes forget what's important and hurt people they love. But you'll also understand that love is stronger than mistakes and forgiveness is stronger than hurt. Sarah was crying openly now, and even Marcus had tears in his eyes.
Richard stood slightly apart, his face a mask of shame and regret. I want you to remember this birthday.
Not because of the fight between the grown-ups, but because it was the day you learned that respect isn't about money or fancy clothes or big houses. Respect is about how you treat people, especially people who can't do anything for you. I looked up at my children as I continued reading. Your parents are good people who lost their way for a while. That happens sometimes. But they raised you to be kind and curious and honest, and those are the most valuable gifts anyone can give. When you're older, you might face the same temptations your parents faced. You might think that success means forgetting where you came from, or that being important means treating others as less important. When that happens, I want you to remember your grandfather's wooden car and how much love can fit into something small and simple. Tommy was listening with the intense focus that children give to stories that feel important.
Even when they don't understand all the implications, use this money wisely.
Get a good education, but don't forget that the most important lessons aren't taught in classrooms. They're taught around kitchen tables and in small workshops and in moments when you choose to be kind, when you could choose to be cruel. I folded the letter and handed it back to Tommy, who held it carefully against his chest along with his wooden car. There's one more thing, I said, reaching into my other pocket. I pulled out a small brass key attached to a simple chain. This is the key to my workshop. When you're old enough, I'll teach you how to make things with your hands, just like I taught your father and your mother when they were young. Will you teach me how to make toys for other kids? Tommy asked, if that's what you want to learn. Or we can make furniture or fix broken things or build inventions that no one's ever thought of before. The important thing is learning that creating something is more satisfying than buying something. Marcus stepped forward hesitantly.
Dad, I remember those lessons.
In the workshop behind the store. You taught me how to use a screwdriver before I could properly hold a pencil. You were a good student, I said simply. You all were.
I just wish I'd taught you other lessons as well. It's not too late, Sarah said quietly. Is it? I mean, we're adults now, but...
Could we learn those other lessons? I looked at my daughter, successful, accomplished, beautiful Sarah, who was asking her father to teach her things she should have learned years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me, but there was no bitterness in it anymore. Only sadness for the lost time and hope for the time that remained. It depends, I said.
Are you willing to be students again?
Are you willing to admit that there are things you don't know? Yes, Marcus said immediately.
God, yes. Dad, we've made such a mess of everything.
The business, our relationship with you, our own values. We need help. Richard, who had been silent through most of the afternoon's revelations, finally spoke up. Mr. Khan, I know I have no right to ask this, but would you consider being a consultant for Richardson and Associates? We clearly don't know what we're doing, and... I held up my hand. Richard, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in trying to fix your business.
That's your responsibility. His face fell, but I wasn't finished. However,
If you're genuinely interested in learning how to run a business with integrity, how to treat employees with respect, how to build something that lasts, then maybe we can talk, not as a consultant, but as a father-in-law who wants to see his family succeed. The hope that
flickered in his eyes was almost
painful to witness as the last guests departed and JP drove away with promises to call tomorrow about our upcoming projects. I found myself alone with my family for the first time in 3 years. The mansion felt different now, less like a monument to their success, and more like a house where people lived and made mistakes and tried to figure out how to love each other. "Dad," Sarah said as we stood in the aftermath of the party, surrounded by decorations and discarded wrapping paper, "I'm sorry. We're all sorry. But I don't know if sorry is enough." "Sorry is a beginning," I told her. "But you're right that it's not enough. Trust is rebuilt through actions, not apologies." "Then tell us," Marcus said. "Tell us what we need to do." I looked around the room one more time, taking in the opulence that had once intimidated me, the wealth that had once made me feel small and forgotten. But now I saw it differently. Now I saw it as just stuff, expensive stuff, but stuff nonetheless. What mattered were the people in the room and the choices they would make going forward. "Start by coming to work," I said. "Not at Milestone Productions, that's mine and JP's, but come to the workshop.
learn to make something with your hands again.
Remember what it feels like to create value instead of just managing it." "All of us?" Richard asked uncertainly. "Especially you," I said, looking at him directly. "You married into this family, but you've never really understood what this family stands for. Maybe it's time you learned." As evening settled over the house and Tommy played quietly with his wooden car and new train set, we began the slow, difficult work of becoming a family again. There were no guarantees, no promises that the damage could be fully repaired. But there was something more valuable than guarantees. There was commitment. The birthday party was over, but the real celebration, the celebration of second chances and hard-earned wisdom, was just beginning, and in my pocket, next to the keys to my workshop, I carried the most precious gift of all, my grandson's letter to me, written in crayon on the back of a napkin while the adults were talking. "Dear Grandpa, thank you for my car and my train and my money, but mostly thank you for teaching me that love is better than being rich. I want to learn how to make toys too.
Love, Tommy. P.S. You are the best grandpa in the world." Some gifts, I realized, are worth more than empires.
And some lessons are worth a lifetime of teaching. The birthday party that had started with laughter and ended with tears had given us all something we'd forgotten we needed, the chance to remember who we really were and who we wanted to become.